The December wind cut through the streets of Chicago like a blade, carrying with it the scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen but promised to arrive before morning. The city was alive with the chaos of Christmas Eve, last-minute shoppers rushing through crowded sidewalks, street vendors hawking roasted chestnuts, carolers stationed on corners singing hymns that echoed off the tall buildings. Lights twinkled from every storefront window, red and green and gold, casting a warm glow that seemed to promise magic and hope. But in the Romano mansion, perched on a sprawling estate 20 miles outside the city, none of that warmth penetrated. The house was a fortress, 3 stories of stone and steel, surrounded by walls topped with security cameras that swept the perimeter in endless, vigilant rotations. Armed guards stood at the gates, their breath visible in the cold air, hands never far from the weapons concealed beneath their coats. More guards patrolled the grounds, their footsteps crunching on the frozen grass, their eyes scanning for threats that might never come but could never be dismissed. Inside, the mansion was silent. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet evening, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a place where joy had been suffocated by fear. The marble floors stretched endlessly, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Expensive paintings lined the walls, masterpieces that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, but no one stopped to admire them. The furniture was immaculate, untouched, arranged with the precision of a museum display. Everything in the house was perfect, controlled, and utterly devoid of life. Vincent Romano stood in his office on the 2nd floor, staring out the bulletproof window at the winter landscape beyond. He was 42 years old, though the weight he carried made him feel decades older. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples, he commanded attention without effort. His suit was custom-tailored, dark gray with subtle pinstripes, fitted perfectly to his frame. A watch that cost more than a car gleamed on his wrist. Everything about his appearance spoke of power, control, and wealth, but his eyes told a different story. They were gray like storm clouds before rain, and they held a coldness that made grown men look away. Vincent Romano was not a man you crossed, not a man you questioned. In the world he inhabited, a world of shadowy dealings, unspoken rules, and swift retribution, his name carried weight. People feared him, respected him, obeyed him without hesitation. He had built his empire on that fear, brick by careful brick, decision by calculated decision. He'd made choices others couldn't stomach, eliminated obstacles others couldn't handle, and never once allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment. Until 6 years ago, until the twins were born. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," Vincent said, his voice low and measured. The door opened, and Marcus Chen entered. Marcus had been Vincent's head of security for 8 years, a former military specialist who'd found the private sector more profitable and less restrictive. He was compact and efficient, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a calm demeanor that never cracked under pressure. "The evening schedule, boss," Marcus said, approaching the desk and laying down a tablet. "Everything's confirmed. Route's been scouted 3 times. Teams briefed. We'll have 4 vehicles, 12 men total. Restaurant's been notified. They're clearing the back section like you requested." Vincent picked up the tablet, scanning the details with the same intensity he brought to every operation. Routes color-coded for risk levels. Backup plans labeled A through D. Medical evacuation protocols. Communication frequencies. Nothing was left to chance. "Time frame?" Vincent asked. 90 minutes, maximum. In at 7, out by 8:30. That gives us darkness both ways and minimal traffic. Vincent nodded slowly, setting down the tablet. "And the location's secure?" "As secure as any public place can be. Small family restaurant, been there 30 years. Owners, cooperative, understands the situation. No cameras inside except ours. Kitchen staff's been vetted. It's as clean as we're going to get for something like this. Something like this. Taking 2 6-year-old children to dinner on Christmas Eve. An act so simple, so ordinary for millions of families across the country. Yet for Vincent Romano it required the planning and resources of a military operation. "They've been asking about it all week," Vincent said quietly, almost to himself. "Emma, especially. She keeps signing outside and people and Christmas lights. I keep telling myself it's too risky, that anything outside these walls is too dangerous." Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "With respect, boss, they're 6 years old. They've barely left this property in their entire lives. At some point. What?" Vincent's voice sharpened. At some point I should just pretend the world is safe? That there aren't a dozen people out there who'd love nothing more than to hurt me by hurting them? No, sir. But isolation is its own kind of hurt. The words hung in the air between them. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the window, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus knew when to press and when to retreat. "I'll make sure everything's ready," he said, moving toward the door. 6:45 departure. "Marcus," Vincent called out, stopping him. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, we abort. Immediately." "Understood, boss." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Vincent alone with his thoughts once more. 3 floors below in the mansion's east wing, the twins were in their playroom. It was the one room in the entire house that showed signs of actual life. Toys were scattered across the plush carpet, building blocks and stuffed animals and puzzles in various states of completion. A small table in the corner held art supplies, crayons and markers and papers covered in the enthusiastic scribbles of children still learning to control their small hands. The walls were painted a soft yellow, warmer than the cold whites and grays that dominated the rest of the house, and someone, probably the housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had put up construction paper decorations for Christmas. Emma Romano sat cross-legged on the floor, her dark curls falling around her face as she concentrated on a puzzle. She had her father's gray eyes, though hers held none of his coldness, only curiosity and a brightness that persisted despite the limitations of her world. She wore a red sweater with a reindeer on it, specially chosen for tonight's outing, though she didn't fully understand where they were going or why it was special. Her brother Liam was at the window, his hands pressed against the glass as he stared at the grounds beyond. He was taller than his sister by an inch, with the same dark hair, but his mother's softer features, or so Vincent had been told. Vincent never spoke about their mother, and the twins had no memories of a woman they'd never known. Liam turned from the window and began signing rapidly to his sister, his small hands forming the shapes with the fluency of a native speaker. "Emma, look, snow, maybe." Emma looked up from her puzzle, her face brightening. She signed back, equally fluent. "Snow? Real snow? Not just cold? Sky looks like picture. From book. Remember?" Their communication was beautiful in its silence, a complete language that existed in movement and expression, in the tilt of a head and the speed of hands. Most people seeing them would notice only the absence of sound. They wouldn't understand that silence wasn't empty for Emma and Liam. It was simply different. The door opened and their tutor, Miss Sarah Winters, entered. She was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and patient, who had been teaching the twins since they were 2 years old. She was one of only 3 people in the household who were fluent in American Sign Language, Vincent being another, though his signing was more functional than elegant, and Mrs. Chen knowing only basic phrases. "Good afternoon, my darlings," Miss Winters signed, her movements slow and clear. "Are we excited about tonight?" Both children rushed to her, their faces alight with an excitement that rarely had anywhere to go. "Where are we going?" Emma signed. "Father won't tell us, just says special place." "A restaurant," Miss Winters signed back. "A place where people go to eat dinner together, with tables and chairs and other families." "Other families?" Liam's eyes widened. "Other children?" Miss Winters hesitated. She knew the truth, that the restaurant would be carefully controlled, that the children would be kept separate from other patrons, that this outing was less about normalcy and more about the illusion of it, but she couldn't bring herself to dim the light in their eyes. "Perhaps," she signed, "but remember, we must stay with Father and the security team. We must listen and be careful. Always careful," Emma signed, and there was something sad in the gesture. "Always guards, always watching." Miss Winters knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl. "Your father loves you very much. Everything he does is to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" Liam signed. "We don't understand. What's out there that's so scary? How do you explain the reality of Vincent Romano's world to 6-year-old children? How do you tell them that their father's business, the sources of the wealth that surrounded them, the reasons for the guards and the walls, came with enemies? That there were people who would harm innocent children simply to send a message, to gain leverage, to strike at a man who had struck at them? You don't," Miss Winters thought. "You let them have their childhood innocence for as long as possible. The world can be complicated," she signed carefully. "But tonight, we're just going to have dinner and see Christmas decorations. Would you like to practice your table manners?" The children groaned in unison. a sound they could make even if they couldn't hear it, a vibration in their throats that expressed their feelings perfectly. Vincent entered the playroom at 6:30, precisely 15 minutes before departure. He changed from his business suit into something slightly less formal, dark slacks, a black sweater, a coat that concealed the firearm he never went without. His presence immediately changed the energy in the room, as it always did. Even his own children felt the weight of his authority. "Father," Emma signed, rushing to him. Liam followed more slowly, always the more cautious of the two. Vincent knelt down, bringing himself to their level, something he did consciously, remembering advice from a child psychologist he'd consulted years ago. Make yourself smaller. Meet them where they are. Show them they matter more than your power. "Are you ready for our adventure?" he signed, his movements less fluid than Miss Winters, but clear enough. "Yes," Emma signed enthusiastically. "Miss Winters says there will be decorations, and other people, and special food. All of that," Vincent confirmed. "But remember our rules. You stay close to me. You hold hands with Miss Winters. You don't wander off. You don't approach strangers. Understood?" Both children nodded solemnly, signing their agreement. Vincent studied their faces, so young, so innocent, so completely dependent on him for everything. The weight of that responsibility was crushing sometimes. Every decision he made, every risk he calculated, every enemy he created in his business dealings, all of it had consequences that could touch these two small lives. Their mother would have handled this differently, he thought. Not for the first time. Isabella would have known how to balance protection and freedom, how to let them experience the world without drowning in fear. But Isabella had died bringing them into the world, and Vincent was left to figure it out alone. "Come," he signed, standing and offering each child a hand. "The cars are waiting." The convoy assembled in the circular driveway like a small military operation. 4 black SUVs, identical and unmarked, their windows tinted dark enough to be illegal in most states. The lead vehicle carried 3 security personnel. Vincent, the twins, and Miss Winters would ride in the second vehicle with Marcus driving, and another guard in the passenger seat. The third and fourth vehicles carried additional security and equipment. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway watching as they loaded the children into the car. She'd worked for Vincent for 5 years, and in that time, she'd never seen him take the children anywhere public. Her husband Marcus had briefed her on the plan, and she'd spent the day worrying. "Be safe," she called out, knowing they couldn't hear her but needing to say it anyway. Vincent caught her eye and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and reassurance. Inside the SUV, Emma and Liam pressed their faces to the windows, watching the gates swing open. They'd been through those gates only a handful of times in their lives, always heavily protected, always to medical appointments or the occasional visit to Vincent's private office in the city, never for something as simple as dinner. The world beyond the gates was already dressed for Christmas. Houses they passed had lights strung along roof lines, inflatable snowmen and reindeer in yards, wreaths on doors. The twins signed rapidly to each other, pointing out everything they saw, their excitement building with each block. Vincent watched them, feeling something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. It might have been joy, watching his children experience something so simple, or it might have been fear, knowing how many things could go wrong. With Vincent, it was often hard to tell the difference. Marcus navigated the streets with practiced efficiency, taking a route they'd scouted multiple times. The other vehicles maintained precise distances, close enough for rapid response, far enough to avoid looking like an obvious convoy. To most observers, they'd just look like traffic. "ETA 12 minutes, Marcus said quietly, his voice calm and professional. "Traffic's light. Everything's clear." Vincent nodded, his hand resting on his phone, ready to abort the entire operation if Marcus gave the word. In the back seat, Miss Winters kept the children engaged, signing about the Christmas story, about traditions, about what they might see at the restaurant. She was good at her job, patient and kind, genuinely caring for these isolated children who had so little contact with the world. "Will there be music?" Emma signed. "Like in the books?" Miss Winters glanced at Vincent, unsure how to answer. The children understood intellectually that hearing people experienced sound. They'd read about it, seen videos with captions, but they couldn't truly comprehend what they were missing. "There might be," Miss Winters signed carefully. "But remember, we experience the world differently. We feel vibrations. We see expressions and movements. That's our music." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, turning back to the window. The restaurant came into view 8 blocks later, a small, family-owned Italian place called Marino's, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookshop that had been there since the 1950s. It wasn't fancy, wasn't trendy, wasn't the kind of place Vincent Romano would normally be caught in, but that was precisely why Marcus had chosen it. Low profile, established ownership, good sightlines, only 2 entrances, perfect for control. The convoy pulled into the alley behind the restaurant, away from the street traffic. The lead vehicle disgorged its team first, 4 men who immediately secured the perimeter, checking doorways and windows with practiced efficiency. Only when they signaled all clear did Marcus open Vincent's door. "We're good," Marcus confirmed. "Back entrance is clear, sections ready, teams in position." Vincent stepped out, immediately scanning the environment with the instincts that had kept him alive for 2 decades. Then he turned back to help the children out of the SUV. Emma and Liam emerged slowly, their eyes wide as they took in this new environment. Even the alley was exciting to them. Dumpsters and fire escapes and the back doors of businesses, all mundane details that were completely foreign to children who lived behind walls and gates. "Stay close," Vincent signed, taking Emma's hand while Miss Winters took Liam's. They moved as a unit toward the back entrance of Marino's, surrounded by a protective circle of security personnel. To anyone watching, it might have looked excessive, but Vincent knew the statistics, knew how quickly things could go wrong, knew that the world he operated in didn't forgive mistakes. The back door opened, and a nervous-looking man in his 50s appeared, Tony Marino, the owner. He'd been contacted 3 days ago, offered a sum of money he couldn't refuse and given very specific instructions about tonight. "Mr. Romano," Tony said, his voice shaking slightly. "Everything's ready, just like you asked. Back section's completely private. We moved all the other reservations to the front. Your party will have complete privacy." Vincent nodded, not bothering with pleasantries. He stepped inside, pulling Emma with him, his eyes immediately cataloging exits, potential threats, positions of his security team. The restaurant was exactly as advertised, small, old-fashioned, with red and white checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling, paper snowflakes and tinsel and strings of lights. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air, and somewhere in the front section, Vincent could hear the murmur of other diners celebrating their own Christmas Eves. But in the back section, separated by a partial wall and carefully positioned security personnel, there was only one table, set for 4, with a small artificial Christmas tree placed nearby, its lights twinkling in the dim restaurant lighting. Emma and Liam stopped in their tracks, staring at the scene with wonder. It was such a small thing. A table, some decorations, the warmth of a restaurant full of people celebrating. But to children who had spent their entire lives in isolation, it might as well have been a different planet. "Beautiful," Emma signed, her small hands trembling slightly with emotion. Liam just nodded, speechless, taking in every detail with those careful, observant eyes he'd inherited from his father. Vincent felt that tightness in his chest again, watching them. For a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, he wondered if he'd been wrong, if all the protection, all the isolation, all the careful control had done more harm than good. But then his training kicked back in, his awareness spreading out like radar, cataloging every person in the restaurant, every sightline, every potential problem. He couldn't afford to be sentimental, couldn't afford to let emotion cloud his judgment. His children's safety depended on his vigilance. "Come," he signed, leading them to the table. "Let's sit." As they settled into their seats, Emma bouncing slightly with excitement, Liam still taking everything in, Miss Winters smiling gently at both of them, Vincent caught Marcus's eye across the room. Everything secure. Marcus signed with subtle gestures they'd developed over years of working together. Vincent nodded slightly, then turned his attention back to his children. For 90 minutes, he told himself, he could give them this small taste of normalcy, this brief window into the world that other children took for granted. 90 minutes, then back to the safety of the fortress, back to the silence. But for now, for this moment, he watched Emma point excitedly at the Christmas tree, watched Liam carefully examine the menu even though he couldn't read most of it yet, and allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that perhaps this could work, that perhaps they could have this. The waitress who would change everything hadn't arrived at their table yet. That moment was still ahead, still waiting to unfold. For now, Vincent Romano sat with his children in a small Italian restaurant on Christmas Eve, surrounded by guards and walls of his own making, and tried to remember what it felt like to simply be a father. It was harder than any business deal he'd ever negotiated, and far more terrifying than any enemy he'd ever faced. Sarah Mitchell's feet were aching. It was barely 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and she'd already been on her shift for 9 hours straight. Her lower back throbbed with that familiar pain that came from carrying heavy trays and standing on unforgiving tile floors. Her hands smelled like garlic and dish soap, and there was a stain on her apron from when a customer's child had knocked over a glass of cranberry juice during the early dinner rush. But she smiled anyway, because that's what you did when you worked for tips and needed every dollar. "Table 6 needs refills," Marco called from behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with practiced efficiency. Marco was Tony Marino's son, a stocky guy in his 30s who'd been working at his father's restaurant since he was old enough to bus tables. "And table 3 is ready for their check." "Got it," Sarah replied, grabbing the water pitcher and heading toward the front section of the restaurant. Marino's was packed tonight, as it always was on Christmas Eve. The Marino family had been serving Italian food in this neighborhood for 3 generations, and for many locals, eating here on holidays had become a tradition. The restaurant had that warm, lived-in feel that fancy places could never quite replicate. Walls covered in family photographs, mismatched chairs that had been repaired a dozen times, the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like you were eating in someone's home rather than a business establishment. Sarah had been working at Marino's for 2 years, ever since she'd moved to Chicago from a small town in Indiana. It wasn't glamorous work, and the pay was barely enough to cover her tiny studio apartment and her brother's expenses. But Tony was a decent boss who didn't ask too many questions and let her pick up extra shifts when she needed them. And lately, she always needed them. She refilled water glasses at table 6, a family of 5 with 3 children under 10, all dressed in their Sunday best for the holiday. The youngest was signing something to her mother, and Sarah felt that familiar pang of recognition. The signs were clumsy, clearly still being learned, but Sarah understood them perfectly. "More bread, please," the little girl was signing. Her mother looked confused, trying to interpret the gestures. Sarah set down the pitcher and smiled at the child. "Would you like more bread?" She signed clearly, her movements fluid and natural. The little girl's face lit up with surprise and delight. "Yes, please, you can sign?" "I can." Sarah signed back, then spoke aloud for the parents' benefit. "I'll bring more bread right away." The mother's eyes glistened slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We're still learning. She was diagnosed only 6 months ago and we're trying to keep up, but..." "You're doing great," Sarah said warmly. "She's very expressive. That's the most important thing." As Sarah walked back toward the kitchen, she thought about her brother Danny, who was probably at their apartment right now, watching Christmas movies with the captions turned on. Danny was 14, born profoundly deaf, and he'd been Sarah's responsibility since their parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. She'd been 25, working her way through community college, and suddenly she was a guardian, a sister trying to play parent, navigating a world of audiologists and social services and advocacy groups. It had been the hardest 3 years of her life, but Danny was thriving. He was in a good school, had friends, was learning and growing, and if Sarah had to work double shifts on Christmas Eve to make that possible, then that's what she'd do. "Sarah!" Tony's voice cut through her thoughts, urgent and low. He gestured for her to come to the kitchen, his expression tense in a way she'd never seen before. She pushed through the swinging door, worried something had gone wrong. "What's up, Tony? Everything okay?" Tony glanced around the kitchen where the cooks were busy with orders, then pulled Sarah aside near the dry storage area. "Listen, I need you to handle something for me tonight. Something unusual." "Okay," Sarah said slowly, her instincts prickling. "What kind of unusual?" "There's a private party in the back section. Very private, very important. They've requested complete discretion, and they're paying extremely well for it." Tony rubbed his face, looking uncomfortable. "I need you to be their server. Only you. No one else goes back there. You take their orders, bring their food, handle everything, and you don't talk about it afterward. Not to the other staff, not to anyone. Understood?" Sarah's unease grew. "Tony, what's going on? Who are these people?" "People who value their privacy," Tony said carefully. "Look, I can't tell you more than that, but I can tell you that everything's legitimate. There's nothing illegal happening, and you'll get a tip that'll probably cover your rent for 2 months. Can you do this?" Sarah thought about Danny, about the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, about the new hearing aid he needed that insurance only partially covered. She thought about her pride, her instincts that were telling her this was strange, possibly risky. Then she thought about reality. "Yeah," she said. "I can do it." Tony's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Just be professional, be quiet, and don't ask questions. They'll let you know what they need." He handed her a small notepad and pen, then pointed toward the partial wall that separated the back section from the main dining area. Sarah had worked here for 2 years and couldn't remember that section ever being closed off like this. She smoothed down her apron, tucked a strand of her light brown hair back into her ponytail, and took a deep breath. Whatever this was, she could handle it. She'd handled harder things. Sarah stepped around the partition and immediately understood why Tony had been nervous. The back section had been transformed. All the tables except one had been removed, creating an open space that felt more like a private dining room than part of a restaurant. The single remaining table was set for 4, with cloth napkins instead of paper, real wine glasses instead of the usual cheap tumblers, and a small Christmas tree positioned nearby with carefully arranged presents underneath it. But what really caught her attention were the men. There were at least 5 of them positioned around the room's perimeter, standing rather than sitting, their postures alert and watchful. They were all wearing dark clothing, suits or tactical gear, she couldn't quite tell in the dim lighting, and they all had the same hard-eyed, observant look that made Sarah's instincts scream danger. Security. These were security personnel. What kind of family needed this level of protection for a Christmas Eve dinner? At the table sat a man who could only be described as commanding. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed despite the casual setting. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and his face had the kind of sharp, angular features that would photograph well but seemed carved from stone in person. He sat with perfect posture, his hands resting on the table, his eyes scanning the room with the constant vigilance of someone who never truly relaxed. Next to him were 2 children, twins, Sarah realized immediately. A boy and a girl, maybe 6 years old, with matching dark curls and wide gray eyes that held a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They were dressed nicely, the girl in a red sweater and the boy in a button-down shirt, and they were looking around the room with the wonder of children who didn't get out much. An older woman sat on the children's other side, gray-haired and gentle-looking, her posture protective as she kept one hand on each child's shoulder. Sarah approached the table, her professional smile in place despite her racing thoughts. "Good evening. Welcome to Marino's. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man, clearly the father, looked at her with those cold gray eyes, assessing her in a way that made her feel like she was being catalogued and evaluated for threats. Water for everyone. No ice in the children's glasses. His voice was low and controlled, the kind of voice that was used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Of course," Sarah said, writing it down even though it was simple enough to remember. "I'll be right back with those." As she turned to leave, she noticed something. The little girl was signing to her brother, her hands moving in quick, fluid gestures. The boy signed back, his movements equally natural. Sarah's step faltered slightly. The children were deaf. She continued to the kitchen, her mind working. Private party, heavy security, a powerful-looking father with eyes like a winter storm. 2 deaf children who seemed both excited and nervous to be in this public space. Whatever this family story was, it wasn't simple. Sarah returned with a tray of water glasses, setting them down carefully at each place. The children watched her with curious eyes, and the older woman, their tutor or nanny perhaps, smiled politely. "Thank you," the woman said warmly. "The children would like to look at the menu, please." Sarah distributed the menus, noting that the children immediately opened theirs and began pointing at the pictures, signing rapidly to each other. The father watched them with an expression that was hard to read. Protective, certainly, but also something else. Sadness, maybe. Or fear. "Take your time deciding," Sarah said. "I'll check back in a few minutes." She retreated to give them privacy, though she kept them in her peripheral vision as she attended to her other tables in the front section. The contrast was striking. In the main dining room, families laughed and talked loudly. Children ran between tables. Couples held hands over their meals. The atmosphere was warm and chaotic and alive. But in that back section, separated by just a partial wall, everything was contained, controlled. The children's excitement was muted, channeled through silent hand gestures. The father's attention never wavered from his surroundings. The security personnel remained motionless, like statues. It felt less like a family dinner, and more like a military operation. 5 minutes later, Sarah returned to take their orders. The older woman spoke for the group, having apparently consulted with the children. The children would both like the spaghetti with butter and cheese. Simple, please, nothing too heavily seasoned. I'll have the chicken marsala, and Mr. Romano will have lasagna, the man, Mr. Romano, said shortly, and a glass of the house red. Sarah wrote it all down, then hesitated. The little girl was tugging on the older woman's sleeve, signing something urgently. The woman watched, trying to interpret, her brow furrowing slightly. She's asking if she can have extra cheese, Sarah said quietly, without thinking. Everyone at the table froze. The older woman's eyes widened. The father's head snapped toward Sarah so fast she instinctively took a step back. Even the security personnel seemed to shift, their attention suddenly laser-focused on her. What did you say? Mr. Romano asked, his voice dangerously soft. Sarah's heart hammered. Had she made a mistake? Overstepped somehow? The little girl was signing. She was asking if she could have extra cheese on her pasta. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. You know sign language? The father's eyes had changed, the coldness replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Surprise, suspicion, and underneath it all, something that might have been hope. Yes, sir, American Sign Language, I'm fluent. The little girl's eyes lit up like stars. She immediately began signing rapidly, her hands moving so fast Sarah almost couldn't keep up. You can understand me? Really understand? Not just some signs, but all of them? Can you teach me new signs? Do you know other deaf people? Have you ever been to a deaf school? Why do you work here? Do you like Christmas? Can you see the tree? Isn't it pretty? Sarah couldn't help but smile at the barrage of questions. She knelt down slightly, bringing herself to the child's eye level, and signed back just as fluently. Yes, I can understand you perfectly. I'd love to teach you new signs if your father says it's okay. I know many deaf people. My little brother is deaf. I work here because I like helping people enjoy good food. I love Christmas. And yes, the tree is absolutely beautiful. The little girl's whole face transformed with joy. She grabbed her brother's arm, signing excitedly. Liam, she can talk to us. She understands. The boy, Liam, looked at Sarah with more caution than his sister, but there was curiosity in his eyes too. He signed slowly, carefully. What's your name? My name is Sarah, she signed back. What are your names? I'm Emma, the girl signed, practically bouncing in her seat. And this is Liam. We're twins. We're 6 years old. We've never met someone outside our house who can sign. Well, except Miss Winters and Father and some of the staff, but they learned for us. You already knew how. Sarah glanced up at the father, Mr. Romano, who was watching this interaction with an expression that was impossible to read. The older woman, Miss Winters apparently, had tears in her eyes. Is it all right if I communicate with them? Sarah asked carefully, standing back up and addressing the adults. I don't want to overstep. Mr. Romano was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was grinding through some internal decision. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. It's fine. But his eyes never left Sarah, watching her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every movement she made. Emma immediately started signing again. Can you tell us about the restaurant? We've never been to one before. Not really. Father says we went when we were babies, but we don't remember. What do all these people do here? Why is it so busy? Do they all know each other? Sarah's heart clenched at the innocent questions. These children had never been to a restaurant before. At 6 years old, what kind of life were they living? She signed back patiently. A restaurant is where people come to eat food they didn't cook themselves. All these families are here celebrating Christmas Eve together. Most of them don't know each other. They just all chose to come to the same place. See that family over there? She pointed subtly toward the main dining room, where a multi-generational group was laughing loudly. They're probably grandparents, parents, and children all having dinner together to celebrate the holiday. Can we see them? Liam signed, his caution giving way to curiosity. Can we go look? Mr. Romano's response was immediate and firm. No. The word carried such finality that both children's faces fell. Emma's eyes glistened with disappointment, but she didn't argue. She'd clearly heard that tone before and knew better than to push. Sarah felt a surge of sympathy for these kids, whatever their father's reasons, and she suspected they were complex and probably justified in his mind. The children were paying the price for their isolation. I'll put your orders in, she said gently, speaking aloud for Mr. Romano's benefit while signing simultaneously for the children. While you wait, would you like me to tell you about some of the Christmas traditions that families do in restaurants? Emma nodded eagerly. Liam glanced at his father first, seeking permission, and only nodded after Mr. Romano gave a slight tilt of his head. Sarah spent the next few minutes telling them about how some families came to restaurants so nobody had to cook on holidays, how some places sang Christmas carols, how servers sometimes wore Santa hats or reindeer antlers. She kept her hands moving in constant translation, and the children drank in every word like they were hearing fairy tales. Mr. Romano watched the entire interaction without speaking, his expression unreadable. When Sarah finally excused herself to put in their orders, she felt the weight of his gaze follow her all the way to the kitchen. Marco was plating salads when Sarah pushed through the kitchen door. He looked up, grinning. How's the mysterious VIP table? They gonna tip you enough to retire? They're interesting, Sarah said carefully, clipping the order ticket to the line. Family with 2 kids. Pretty private. Tony said you're not supposed to talk about them, Marco reminded her, but his tone was more curious than chiding. I'm not talking about them. I'm just saying they're a family. Sarah grabbed a tray and started loading bread baskets. How's the rush looking? We gonna clear out soon? Probably another hour. Everyone wants to finish dessert before heading to midnight services. Marco paused. Hey, you okay? You look kind of shaken. Sarah forced a smile. I'm fine. Just tired. But she wasn't fine. Something about that table. About those children who'd never been to a restaurant. About that father who looked at the world like it was constantly threatening his family. About the security team that seemed excessive for even a wealthy family's protection. Bothered her deeply. Those kids deserved better than isolation, no matter how dangerous their father's world might be. When their meals were ready, Sarah loaded them onto a tray and carried them back to the private section. The family was talking, or rather signing, among themselves. Emma was telling some animated story, her hands flying, while Liam watched with that serious expression he seemed to wear like armor. Miss Winters was smiling, and even Mr. Romano's face had softened slightly. Sarah set down the plates, making sure to put the extra cheese on Emma's pasta as requested. The little girl's face lit up when she saw it. Thank you, she signed enthusiastically. This looks perfect. You're very welcome, Sarah signed back. Enjoy your dinner. As she turned to leave, Liam signed a question. Sarah, do you celebrate Christmas with your brother? The innocent question hit Sarah harder than she expected. She thought about Danny, alone in their apartment right now because she'd had to work, probably eating microwave dinners and watching TV. We celebrate when I get home from work, she signed back, keeping her smile in place. Late Christmas is still Christmas. Emma's face fell sympathetically. You have to work on Christmas? That's sad. It's okay, Sarah signed. Helping families like yours enjoy their holiday makes it worth it. Mr. Romano spoke for the first time since she'd returned. That's very dedicated of you. His tone was neutral, but there was something in his eyes. An assessment, maybe, or a calculation. Sarah just nodded and retreated once more, feeling increasingly out of her depth. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah moved between her regular tables and the private section, bringing refills and checking on the Romano family's needs. Every time she approached their table, the children would light up, signing questions or observations. Emma wanted to know why some people used forks and some used spoons for their pasta. Liam asked about the Christmas tree decorations and what they represented. Both children were endlessly curious about the world beyond their isolated existence, and Sarah found herself drawn into longer conversations than she probably should have been having during a busy shift. But she couldn't help it. These kids were hungry for connection, for normalcy, for someone outside their controlled environment who understood them. And Mr. Romano, he was an enigma. He barely ate his own meal, his attention constantly divided between his children and the room around them. But Sarah noticed that every time she signed with the kids, his posture would relax fractionally, as if seeing them happy eased some internal tension. When she brought dessert menus, Emma immediately pointed to the chocolate cake with ice cream. Liam chose the tiramisu. Miss Winters requested coffee, and Mr. Romano declined anything for himself. Can Sarah sit with us while we eat dessert? Emma signed, looking hopefully between her father and Sarah. Please? She could tell us more stories about Christmas. Emma, Mr. Romano signed, his movements sharp with parental authority. Miss Sarah is working. She has other customers to attend to. Emma's face fell, and Sarah felt that pang of sympathy again. Actually, Sarah said carefully, speaking aloud while also signing, it's slowing down out front, and you're my only table in this section. If it's all right with your father, I could sit for a few minutes while you enjoy your desserts. She had no idea what possessed her to make the offer. It went against every professional boundary she usually maintained. But something about these children called to her, maybe because they reminded her of Danny when he was younger, lonely and isolated, desperate for connection with people who understood. Mr. Romano's eyes narrowed, studying her with that intense focus that made Sarah feel like he was reading her entire history in her face. She met his gaze steadily, trying to project nothing but honest intentions. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod. Emma practically vibrated with excitement as Sarah pulled over a chair from a nearby table and sat down. Miss Winters smiled warmly, and even Liam seemed pleased, his serious face softening. "Tell us about your brother," Emma signed immediately. "Is he nice? Do you play games together? Does he go to a special school?" Sarah thought about how to answer, aware that Mr. Romano was listening to every word, even though she was signing. "Danny is 14. He's funny and smart and sometimes drives me crazy, like all brothers do. We play video games together. Lots of games have visual cues and subtitles now, so we can both enjoy them. And yes, he goes to a school specifically for deaf students where he's learning alongside other kids like him." "There are schools like that?" Liam signed, his eyes widening. "With other deaf children?" "Many of them," Sarah confirmed. "Places where everyone signs, where being deaf is normal, where kids can learn and play and make friends who understand them." She saw Mr. Romano's expression tighten, but he didn't interrupt. Emma signed wistfully. "We only have lessons with Miss Winters. We don't go to school. Father says it's not safe." Sarah's heart broke a little. She glanced at Mr. Romano, saw the muscle working in his jaw, the internal struggle playing across his features. "Your father loves you very much," Sarah signed carefully, choosing her words with diplomatic precision. "I'm sure he has good reasons for his decisions, but that doesn't mean you can't learn about the world and dream about possibilities." Miss Winters nodded approvingly at the response. Mr. Romano said nothing, but Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something, gratitude maybe, in those cold eyes. The desserts arrived, carried out by Marco, who gave Sarah a curious look when he saw her sitting at the table. She'd owe him an explanation later, but for now, she focused on the children. Emma dove into her chocolate cake with the enthusiasm of a 6-year-old who didn't get sweets often. Liam was more cautious, carefully tasting the tiramisu and signing his approval to Miss Winters. "What's Christmas like at your home?" Emma signed between bites, her face smudged with chocolate. "Do you have a big tree? Lots of presents? Do people come visit?" Sarah thought about her small apartment, the modest tree she and Danny had decorated with ornaments from the dollar store, the handful of presents she'd scrimped and saved to buy. "Our tree is smaller than yours, but we decorated it together, which made it special. We don't have lots of presents or visitors, but we have each other. That's what matters most." "Do you and Danny talk in signs all the time?" Liam asked. "Even when you're alone?" "Mostly," Sarah confirmed. "Sometimes I'll speak while signing, but Danny is my primary language partner, so signing is natural for us. It's how we communicate best. Father learned to sign for us." Emma signed, looking at Mr. Romano with clear adoration. "He practices every day to get better. Miss Winters says he's very dedicated." Sarah glanced at Mr. Romano, saw him shifting uncomfortably with the praise. "That's wonderful," she signed. "Learning a new language as an adult is difficult. It shows how much he cares about connecting with you." For the first time all evening, Mr. Romano's expression softened genuinely. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less dangerous, almost vulnerable. "They're worth any effort," he said quietly, and though the words were simple, they carried enormous weight. The moment hung in the air, intimate and revealing, before one of the security personnel stepped forward and murmured something in Mr. Romano's ear. Immediately, the softness vanished. The walls went back up. Mr. Romano checked his watch and nodded curtly. "We need to leave," he announced, signing simultaneously for the children. "It's getting late." "Already?" Emma signed, disappointed. "But we were having such a nice time. We've been here 90 minutes. Mr. Romano responded, his tone brooking no argument. That was the agreement. 90 minutes. Precisely the time frame Tony had mentioned. This entire evening had been planned down to the minute. Sarah stood, stepping back to give them space. "I'll get your check." "That won't be necessary," Mr. Romano said, pulling a money clip from his pocket. He counted out bills without looking at them. Hundreds, Sarah realized with shock, and placed them on the table. It was easily 4 or 5 times what the meal cost. "Sir, that's too much," Sarah protested automatically. "Consider it compensation for your time," Mr. Romano replied, standing. "And for your discretion. We were never here. You never saw us. Understood?" There was no threat in his voice, but there didn't need to be. The message was clear. "Understood," Sarah agreed. Emma rushed forward, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Thank you for talking to us," she signed with one hand, tears glistening in her eyes. This was the best night ever. Liam joined his sister, signing more formally. "It was an honor to meet you, Miss Sarah. Thank you for making us feel normal." The words pierced Sarah's heart. These children just wanted to feel normal. And apparently, 90 minutes in a restaurant with someone who could communicate with them naturally was the highlight of their isolated lives. "It was my honor," Sarah signed back, crouching down to their level. "You two are wonderful kids. Don't ever forget that you deserve happiness and connection, and all the normal things other children have." She saw Mr. Romano tense at the implicit criticism in her words, but she didn't take them back. These kids needed to hear it. Miss Winters gathered the children, preparing to leave. The security team moved into formation around them, creating that protective bubble again. Mr. Romano paused before following them, looking at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "You were kind to my children tonight. That's not something I'll forget." "They're easy to be kind to," Sarah replied. "They're good kids who deserve more than—" She stopped herself, knowing she was overstepping. "More than what?" Mr. Romano asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Sarah met his eyes, refusing to back down despite every instinct screaming at her to be careful. "More than walls and isolation. They deserve friends and experiences and the chance to be children in the real world." For a moment she thought she'd gone too far. Mr. Romano's face hardened, and she could feel the tension radiating from the security team. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded slightly. "Perhaps you're right, but the real world is dangerous for children like mine. More dangerous than you could possibly understand." "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but a cage is still a cage, even if it's gilded and well-intentioned." The words hung between them, challenging and honest. Mr. Romano's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table next to the cash. "If you're ever in need of work that pays better than this, call that number. Ask for Marcus, tell him Vincent sent you." Vincent. So that was his first name. "I'm fine where I am," Sarah said, though she pocketed the card anyway. Rent was rent after all. The offer stands regardless. Vincent Romano turned to leave, then paused once more. "And Miss Mitchell, yes, I know your name, I know where you live, and I know about your brother. If I were a different kind of man, that knowledge might worry you. But I'm giving you my word that no harm will come to you or your family as a result of tonight. You showed my children kindness when you didn't have to. That means something." The casual revelation that he'd investigated her should have been terrifying. Instead, Sarah just felt tired. "I showed them kindness because they're kids who needed it, not because I wanted anything from you." "I know," Vincent said quietly. "That's precisely why it matters." He walked away, and the Romano family disappeared into the cold December night, surrounded by their security detail, leaving Sarah standing alone in the empty back section with a table full of cash and more questions than answers. Marco found her 5 minutes later, still standing there staring at the money on the table. "Holy," he breathed, seeing the bills. "Sarah, how much did they leave you?" "Too much," Sarah murmured, finally moving to collect the cash. She counted it quickly. $800 for 90 minutes of work. "Who were they?" Marco asked. "Celebrities? Politicians? Some kind of witness protection family?" "I don't know," Sarah lied, remembering Vincent's request for discretion. "Just a private family who valued their privacy." She cleaned the table mechanically, her mind replaying the evening. Those children's faces when they realized she could communicate with them. The way Emma had hugged her before leaving. Liam's careful thank you. Vincent Romano's cold eyes that had briefly shown warmth when he looked at his kids. And his warning about the real world being dangerous for them. What kind of life did that man live that required such extreme security? What had he done, or what had been done to him, that made him believe his children couldn't safely experience a normal childhood? Sarah finished her shift in a daze, deflecting Marco's questions, avoiding Tony's knowing looks. When she finally clocked out at 10:30, She stood in the cold December air outside Marino's, the business card heavy in her pocket. She should throw it away, should forget this entire strange encounter. But she thought about Emma and Liam, trapped in their fortress of safety, desperate for connection with the world. And she thought about Vincent Romano's face when his children smiled. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Danny. "Hey." She signed into the video call when his face appeared on screen. "Merry Christmas. I'm coming home. Want to watch a movie?" Danny's face lit up and he signed back enthusiastically. "Finally, I've been waiting all night. Everything okay? You look weird." "Yeah," Sarah signed, smiling despite everything. "Just had an interesting night at work. I'll tell you about it later. Love you." "Love you too," Danny signed back. As Sarah walked toward the bus stop, snow finally beginning to fall on Chicago's streets, she made a decision. She didn't know what Vincent Romano's story was, and she probably never would. But if those children ever needed someone who understood them, someone outside their isolated world, she'd keep the card, just in case. Because every child deserved at least one person who saw them as more than a security risk. Even the children of dangerous men. 3 days after Christmas, Vincent Romano stood in his office, staring at a file that had been on his desk since the morning after their restaurant visit. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, guardian to her younger brother Daniel Mitchell, age 14, profoundly deaf since birth, parents deceased 3 years prior in a traffic accident, no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond normal student loans, worked at Marino's for 2 years, consistent employment history before that, lived in a modest studio apartment in a decent neighborhood. The file contained everything Marcus could find about her, which meant it contained everything there was to find. Vincent had learned long ago that knowledge was protection, information was power, and understanding potential threats before they materialized was the difference between life and death in his world. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't a threat. She was just a waitress who happened to know sign language and had been kind to his children, and his children hadn't stopped talking about her since. Every morning at breakfast, Emma would sign questions. "Do you think Sarah is working today? Does she have a Christmas tree like ours? Can we see her again?" Liam, more reserved, would add his own quiet inquiries. "Father, do you think there really are schools where all the children sign? Where Emma and I could have friends?" Miss Winters had pulled Vincent aside yesterday with a gentle but firm observation. "Those children experienced more joy in 90 minutes with that young woman than I've seen from them in months. They felt understood, normal, connected to the world." Vincent closed the file and turned to look out the window at the snow-covered grounds. His empire had been built on decisive action, on identifying opportunities and seizing them before competitors could react. Yet here he stood, paralyzed by a decision that should have been simple. His children needed what Sarah Mitchell could provide, not just sign language fluency, but genuine connection with someone from outside their isolated bubble, someone who treated them like normal kids rather than precious, fragile objects that might shatter at any moment. But letting anyone into their lives meant risk. It meant vulnerability. It meant trusting someone with his most precious weakness. Vincent's phone buzzed. "Marcus. Boss, the morning security sweep is complete. Also, Miss Winters is requesting to speak with you. Says it's about the children's education." "Send her up," Vincent replied. 5 minutes later, Miss Winters entered his office with the confident posture of someone who'd been teaching for 40 years. And had learned to advocate for her students regardless of intimidating parents. "Mr. Romano," she began, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. "We need to discuss the twins' development. Their tutoring sessions are going well, according to your reports," Vincent said carefully. "Academically, yes. But education isn't just about reading and mathematics." Miss Winters leaned forward. "Those children are 6 years old. And they've had virtually no socialization outside this household. They don't know how to interact with peers. They have no concept of friendship, of conflict resolution, of the social skills that children naturally develop through regular interaction. They're safe here," Vincent countered, though even to his own ears it sounded like a weak justification. "They're isolated here," Miss Winters corrected gently. "And I understand why. I do. But isolation comes with its own costs. Emma is becoming anxious and withdrawn. Liam is developing behavioral patterns that concern me. He's too controlled, too watchful for a child his age. They're absorbing your fear, Vincent, and it's shaping who they're becoming." Vincent flinched at her use of his first name. She rarely did that, reserving it for moments when she needed him to hear her as a person rather than as an employee. "What are you suggesting?" he asked quietly. The same thing that waitress suggested, whether she realized it or not. Those children need more. They need experiences, connections, opportunities to be children. Miss Winters pulled out her tablet, showing him something she'd prepared. "There's a program, a specialized school for deaf children, excellent reputation, top-tier security that we could supplement. Or if that's too much, we could start smaller. Arrange play dates with other deaf children from families we've vetted. Hire additional tutors who specialize in socialization. Or," Vincent said slowly, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke, "we could bring Sarah Mitchell here, regularly. Let her spend time with the children in a controlled environment where I can ensure everyone's safety." Miss Winters blinked in surprise, then smiled. "That's actually a wonderful idea. She clearly has a gift with them, and her brother's experience could provide valuable perspective. But Vincent, that can't be the only step. It needs to be the first step toward gradually opening their world." "One step at a time," Vincent agreed. "Let me think about the rest." After Miss Winters left, Vincent sat in silence for another 10 minutes before picking up his phone. "Marcus, I need you to make contact with Sarah Mitchell, discreetly. Feel out whether she'd be interested in a private tutoring arrangement." "Tutoring arrangement?" Marcus's voice carried a note of surprise. "Boss, are you sure that's wise?" "No," Vincent admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway. My children deserve more than fear. They deserve a chance at happiness." "Understood. I'll reach out today." Vincent ended the call and returned to staring at Sarah's file. He was inviting a stranger into his home, into his children's lives, based on nothing more than 90 minutes of observation and his children's smiles. In his world, such decisions usually ended badly, but when he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face lighting up when Sarah signed to her. He heard Liam's quiet question about schools where deaf children could have friends. Some risks were worth taking, even for a man who'd built his life on eliminating risk. Sarah was restocking napkin dispensers when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, probably a spam call, but something made her answer. "Miss Mitchell? This is Marcus Chen. We met briefly on Christmas Eve at Marino's. I work for Vincent Romano." Sarah's heart rate spiked. She glanced around the empty restaurant. It was 2 in the afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner, and stepped into the storage room for privacy. "I remember," she said cautiously. "Is everything all right? The children are fine. Better than fine, actually. They haven't stopped talking about you." Marcus's voice was professional but not unfriendly. "Mr. Romano would like to discuss a business proposition with you. Would you be available to meet with him tomorrow?" "A business proposition?" Sarah's mind raced. What kind of proposition? He'd prefer to discuss it in person, but I can tell you it involves spending time with Emma and Liam. Compensated time, at a rate significantly higher than your current employment. Sarah leaned against the storage shelves, processing this. Vincent Romano wanted to hire her to spend time with his children. The man who'd had her investigated, who lived behind walls and security teams, who clearly operated in a world she couldn't begin to understand. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a job here, and a brother to take care of, and—" "Miss Mitchell?" Marcus interrupted gently. "I understand your hesitation. Believe me, I advised caution myself. But those children need what you can provide. Not just sign language instruction. They have that. They need connection with someone who treats them like normal kids. Someone who understands their world but isn't afraid of it." "I saw them for 90 minutes, Sarah protested. "You don't know that I'm the right person for this. Mr. Romano does extensive research before making any decision. He knows your background, your character, your capabilities. And more importantly, his children responded to you in a way they haven't responded to anyone outside their immediate household." Sarah thought about Emma's hug, about Liam's careful thank you, about 2 isolated children desperate for connection. She thought about the $800 in her bank account that had covered Danny's new hearing aid and the overdue electric bill. She thought about Vincent Romano's cold eyes and his admission that the real world was too dangerous for his children. "If I agree to meet with him," Sarah said slowly, "it's just a meeting. No commitments. And I want to know exactly what this proposition involves before I make any decisions." "Completely reasonable," Marcus agreed. "Tomorrow at 2, I can send a car to pick you up." "No car," Sarah said firmly. "Give me an address, and I'll take public transportation. I'm not getting into vehicles with strangers, no matter how well-intentioned." She heard what might have been a chuckle. "Smart. I'll text you the address. It's a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, public and safe. Mr. Romano will meet you there. After hanging up, Sarah stood in the storage room for a long moment, staring at her phone. This was insane. She should delete the text when it came. Forget about the Romano family. Focus on her own life. But she kept seeing Emma's face, hearing her sign. This was the best night ever. Every child deserved more than walls and isolation, even if helping them meant stepping into a world she didn't understand. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Danny. "Hey," she signed when he answered. "I need your advice about something weird." The next afternoon, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, wanting to scope out the location and settle her nerves. The place was upscale but not ostentatious. Exposed brick walls, local art displays, the smell of expensive espresso filling the air. Vincent Romano sat in the back corner, positioned so he could see both exits. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans and a sweater, but somehow still looked like he was conducting a business deal. Two of his security team sat at separate tables, trying and failing to look like normal customers. Sarah approached slowly, her backpack slung over one shoulder, very aware that she was wearing her work clothes and probably smelled like restaurant grease. Vincent stood as she approached, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming." "Mr. Romano." Sarah sat across from him, declining the menu the barista brought over. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What exactly do you want from me?" A ghost of a smile touched Vincent's lips. "Direct. I appreciate that." He folded his hands on the table. "My children need what you can provide. Not just sign language fluency. They have excellent instruction in that. They need exposure to someone from outside their isolated world. Someone who can help them understand that being deaf doesn't mean being limited. They need friends their own age," Sarah said bluntly. "They need school, socialization, normal childhood experiences. Eventually, perhaps. But right now they need a bridge. Someone who can help them transition from their protected environment to something more open." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I'm not naive, Miss Mitchell. I know my children's lives aren't normal. I know the isolation has costs. But the alternative is worse." "What alternative?" Sarah asked. "What are you so afraid of?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. "I've made enemies in my line of work. People who would harm my children to hurt me. That's not paranoia. It's documented fact. 3 years ago, there was an attempted breach of our security. 2 years before that, credible threats that required us to relocate temporarily. My children's safety isn't theoretical." Sarah absorbed this, understanding clicking into place. "So you want me to come to your fortress and give them supervised glimpses of normalcy, while you maintain total control of the situation?" "Yes," Vincent said simply. 3 times a week, 3 hours per session. You'd work with them on language, social skills, share stories about your brother and the deaf community. Help them understand there's a world beyond our walls that they might someday safely access. In exchange, I'll pay you more than you currently make in a month." He named a figure that made Sarah's breath catch. "That's too much," she said automatically. "That's what their happiness is worth to me." The simple honesty in his voice disarmed her. This dangerous man with his security team and his secrets just wanted his children to smile. "I'd need to bring Danny sometimes," Sarah said. "My brother. He could help them see what life as a deaf teenager looks like. Show them it's possible to be happy and independent." Vincent nodded. "I'd want him vetted first, but yes, that could be valuable. And I'm not signing anything that prevents me from walking away if I feel uncomfortable, or if I think what's happening isn't healthy for the children." "Agreed." Sarah studied him, this complicated man who'd built a fortress to protect his children while accidentally imprisoning them. "Why me? You could hire professional therapists, specialized educators, people with actual credentials." "Because my children smiled when they were with you," Vincent said quietly. "Real, genuine smiles I haven't seen in months. Because you treated them like kids who deserved more, not like fragile objects to be protected. Because you challenged me to my face about their isolation, when most people are too intimidated to question anything I do." He leaned forward slightly. "I don't need someone who's afraid of me, Miss Mitchell. I need someone who cares more about my children's welfare than about pleasing their employer. Based on Christmas Eve, that's exactly what you are." Sarah sat back, processing. This could solve her financial problems, could help 2 isolated children who needed connection, could even provide Danny with a unique opportunity to mentor younger deaf kids. But it also meant entering Vincent Romano's world, whatever that actually meant. "1-month trial," she finally said. We see how it goes, and either of us can end the arrangement with a week's notice. And I want complete honesty from you about any safety concerns. If there's a credible threat, I need to know so I can make informed decisions." "Deal," Vincent said immediately. "When can you start?" "After I talk to Danny and think about this for 24 hours. Sarah stood, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "This is the strangest job offer I've ever received, Mr. Romano. I need to make sure I'm making the right decision." Vincent stood as well, extending his hand. "That's fair. Marcus will be in touch tomorrow afternoon for your answer." Sarah shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and turned to leave. "Miss Mitchell," Vincent called after her. She paused, looking back. "Thank you for considering this. My children deserve someone who sees them as more than my weakness, someone who sees them as people." Sarah met his eyes, saw the vulnerability beneath the cold exterior. "They're not your weakness, Mr. Romano. They're your humanity. Don't forget that." She walked out of the coffee shop into the cold afternoon, her mind spinning with possibilities and concerns. Behind her, Vincent Romano sat back down, a genuine smile on his face for the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, his children could have more than safety. Maybe they could have happiness too. 6 months later, the Romano mansion felt different. Vincent stood at his office window on a warm June morning, watching the grounds below where something impossible was happening. His children were playing outside with other kids. 3 children from carefully vetted families, all deaf, all from backgrounds Marcus had investigated thoroughly, ran through the garden with Emma and Liam. Their laughter was silent, but their joy was unmistakable, hands flying in animated conversation as they chased each other around the fountain. Sarah sat on a bench nearby, signing with another parent, relaxed and smiling in a way that had become familiar over the past months. Danny stood with Liam, showing him something on a tablet, their heads bent together in concentration. "Never thought I'd see this," Marcus said quietly, joining Vincent at the window. "The fortress has gates that actually open now." Vincent smiled slightly. "Controlled gates, on specific days, with full security protocols. Still, it's progress." It was more than progress. It was transformation. Sarah had been true to her word, arriving 3 times a week initially, then 4, then 5 as the children's needs became clear. She'd brought Danny, who'd become an unexpected mentor to the twins, showing them that being deaf didn't limit possibilities. She'd shared books, games, stories about the deaf community, slowly expanding their understanding of the world. But more importantly, she'd challenged Vincent at every turn. "They need to meet other deaf children," she'd insisted after the first month. "They need to leave the property occasionally," she'd argued after the second. "They need to attend the deaf community picnic," she'd demanded after the third. Each request had terrified Vincent. Each concession felt like stripping away protective armor. But each time he'd agreed, with conditions, with security, with careful planning, his children had flourished. Emma had transformed from anxious and withdrawn to confident and social. Liam had relaxed, his too watchful demeanor giving way to typical childhood curiosity. They still had challenges, still needed support, but they were becoming children rather than prisoners. "The school enrollment papers are on your desk," Marcus mentioned. "Sarah thinks they're ready for the fall semester." Vincent's jaw tightened. The specialized deaf school was the final frontier, sending his children somewhere he couldn't completely control, trusting strangers with their safety for hours each day. "I know," Vincent said quietly. "I'm reading them tonight." Downstairs, Sarah was gathering the children for their afternoon lesson. She'd created a routine the twins thrived on. Structured but flexible, educational but fun, always pushing them gently toward independence while respecting Vincent's security concerns. She'd also somehow become part of their lives in ways Vincent hadn't anticipated. Emma asked for Sarah when she had nightmares. Liam shared his drawings with her first, before anyone else. And Vincent had found himself seeking her opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with education. She'd become trusted, essential, important, and that terrified him more than any business threat ever had. That evening, after the playdate ended and the other families left, Sarah found Vincent in his office. "We need to talk about September," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation, a familiarity she'd earned over months of challenging him. "The school," Vincent said, not looking up from the enrollment papers. "Yes, Emma and Liam are ready, more than ready. They need this next step." Vincent set down his pen, finally meeting her eyes. "You're asking me to send them into a situation where I can't protect them completely." I'm asking you to trust that you've raised strong, capable children who deserve the chance to thrive." Sarah leaned forward. "Vincent, you've done an incredible job adapting. 6 months ago, these kids barely left the property. Now they have friends, experiences, confidence, but they can't stay in this bubble forever. What if something happens?" Vincent's voice was raw with honest fear. "What if my enemies? What if they grow up so protected that they can't function in the world?" Sarah interrupted. "What if your fear damages them more than any external threat could?" The words hung between them, challenging and true. Vincent looked past her to the window, where twilight was painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Their mother would know what to do," he said quietly. "She would have balanced everything perfectly. I'm just improvising." "You're doing better than improvising," Sarah said gently. "You're learning to be the father they need, not just the protector you think they require. That takes courage." Vincent met her eyes, seeing understanding there rather than judgment. "When did you become so wise about parenting?" "When I became Danny's guardian at 25 with no idea what I was doing." Sarah smiled. "We're both just figuring it out as we go. The difference is you're finally willing to admit it." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken things. "Enroll them," Vincent finally said. "Full security detail, vetted teachers, emergency protocols in place. But yes, they can attend school." Sarah's face lit up. "They're going to be so excited." "Don't tell them yet. I need time to prepare." Vincent hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Sarah, for pushing me, for seeing what they needed when I was too afraid to look. That's what friends do," Sarah said simply, standing to leave. "Friends," Vincent repeated, tasting the word. He had employees, associates, business connections. But friends? That was a category he'd thought closed to him years ago. Sarah paused at the door. "Vincent, your children aren't your weakness. They never were. They're your strength. They're the reason you're becoming a better man." After she left, Vincent sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about transformation and trust and the terrifying beauty of letting go. 3 months later, on the first day of school, Vincent stood with Sarah at the entrance to the Chicago School for the Deaf, watching Emma and Liam walk through the doors with their new backpacks and nervous smiles. Security was everywhere. His team, the school's protocols, emergency plans that had taken weeks to finalize. But for once, Vincent wasn't focused on the risks. He was watching his children step into their future. "They'll be fine," Sarah said quietly, her hand briefly touching his arm. "I know," Vincent replied, surprised to find he meant it. Emma turned back at the door, signing across the distance. "Love you, Father," Liam added. "Thank you for letting us come." Vincent signed back, his movements steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I love you both. Be brave." As his children disappeared into the school, into their new life, Vincent felt something shift fundamentally inside him. Fear would always be there. Vigilance would never completely fade. But now there was something else too. Hope. Hope that his children could be safe and happy, protected and free, loved and independent. "Thank you," he said to Sarah, meaning it with everything he had. "You did this," Sarah replied, smiling. "I just helped you see it was possible." They stood together in the morning sunshine, watching the school doors, both knowing this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. For Emma and Liam, who were finally experiencing the childhood they deserved. For Vincent, who was learning that love meant letting go as much as holding on. And for Sarah, who'd walked into a fortress and helped transform it into a home. The Mafia Boss's twins were born deaf, and what started with a simple act of kindness on Christmas Eve had changed everything. Not through magic or miracles, but through connection, courage, and the revolutionary act of seeing children as people, rather than possessions to be protected. In the end, that made all the difference.